Firstly, I want to say a massive thank you to Swansea UFO Network and Emily Williams, Mike Maunder and Gary Jones for inviting me to be here today. Because without their professionalism, patience and support, this story would never have been told, and it simply has to be. I'm truly humbled to stand on this stage today with such honourable and prestigious speakers. This event was so huge, of such magnitude, it is a burden too great for any one person to bear, and compels me to come forward to tell all of you. I stand before you today because this affects us all. All. And I've said before, it's not my choice, but my duty as a human being to tell you what I witnessed in the early hours of the 26th of February, 2016. I've been made to feel like a victim many times rather than a witness. The subject of UFOs is ridiculed because it's so serious. But I have a strength inside of me that is not my own and forces me to come forward. What we witnessed, we can never unsee. And if the military hadn't flagpoled this event, I wouldn't have seen it either. But I did. That day changed everything for me. Everything I thought I knew, everything I understood, and everything I believed, and posed so many questions for me. I was desperate to tell someone, anyone I thought would know what to do with this information, and I found myself lost in the world for the first time, not knowing who to turn to or who to speak to. I immediately searched the internet and wrote to the Welsh UFO Network first because this happened in Wales, but they weren't doing any investigations, and said if I was serious, I should speak to a gentleman called Richard D. Hall, a respected alternative investigative reporter who would be in Merthyr that very Sunday night. And I decided there and then that I would go to see him, just to tell him what I had seen. I didn't know Richard, but I was told he was the best, and I needed the best. When I arrived at his conference, I went straight in and frantically spelled out precisely what I had seen. I don't even think I took a breath, but I felt relieved that I had told someone. He invited me to speak to the audience at the end of his show and asked the audience if they'd seen anything. I'd never spoken publicly before, I'd never attended a conference before, and I certainly wasn't aware of how Q&As were supposed to go. And I stood up and told the whole room exactly what I saw. In fact, I didn't get a chance to tell the whole story before other people stood up to say what they'd witnessed. And the whole room was a buzz of mumbling voices because everyone there had experienced something, from explosions to lights in the sky. I gave Richard my telephone number and the name and contact details of a second witness who was with me that night and waited for him to call, but he never did. Not until I had taken and passed a lie detector test did he contact me via my Facebook, and only this year. He has maintained publicly we gave fake names, but we did not, and the telephone numbers and emails given at the time are still live today. Richard D. Hall suggested this incident was a drill at the Royal Mint. Everybody read that? I also have proof that the 9-hour operation was concerned with the Royal Mint and therefore unlikely to be UFO related. He was telling me. I saw it. This story only ever came from Richard and has no basis in truth whatsoever. Whatsoever. And in his video, dated 16th of June 2016, in his attempt to publicly discredit me and silence me, this is one of the top people in the country trying to put me in a box and shut me up. Well, I'm not going to shut up. Not since they threatened my family. Anyway, it greatly concerns and shocks me that even within supposed disclosure circles in this country, there is a systematic cover-up of the evidence and intimidation, assaulting and silencing of witnesses, and this has to stop now. because people are suffering in silence. Some have even been driven to suicide. Others take drugs or alcohol because they've got no one to go to. No one. The time for ridicule is over. I have been warned several times to be careful what I say, and my family, other witnesses, passively threatened with perhaps a fatal car accident. I'm under no illusions as to the seriousness of this case, and for all my weaknesses I still fear for my own safety. But this must be done, for all our sakes. And I won't be silenced by anyone. I'd also made some comments on Wales Online. We'll get to those. Our local mainstream news outlet, about what had really happened under their cover story of a military exercise. I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs, and a few days later I was contacted via my Facebook page by Jessica Morgan Flynn and asked to contact her regarding my comments about the military. If anybody else would like to phone her, her email and telephone numbers on the board. Please ask her if she contacted anybody else and interrogated them that day. I'll continue, so sorry. She leant on me really hard. She wanted to know who I had spoken to, specifically, what I had said, specifically, and how these conversations had taken place, specifically, whether it be telephone, text, chat boxes, emails, did I have any photographs or video of this thing? The questioning went on, or should I say, the interrogation. I don't intimidate easily, but when I got off the phone I was physically shaking, and I didn't speak to anyone about it after that, and I didn't go out. My computer was hacked, my emails were hacked, my phone was hacked, and valuable audio messages deleted, but not before other people had a chance to hear them. And for a full 18 months I stayed silent, until Emmy Williams from Swansea UFO Network found me. And even then, reluctantly, when I did agree to meet with him, the number of conditions I had placed upon him were great and many, because of my fear, for my own safety. But he still came. I do believe I had some form of post-traumatic stress disorder from this event, and emotionally, I still had the fight or flight mentality, and I think the whole team can testify to that. After the incident, my health began to deteriorate. Little things at first, they got progressively worse, until on New Year's Eve, 2016-2017, I nearly died. I should have thought of it sooner, but to be honest, I didn't really put the two together immediately, and when I did, I didn't know how to tell my doctors. So it was the primary reason why I took a lie detector test for myself. So I could be open and honest with my doctors and my consultants about what had really happened to me, and I needed them to take me seriously. I knew it was a double-edged sword, because I knew it would help the investigation that Swansea had started. But I didn't want to scare away my examiner, so I told them it was a very low-key affair and wanted the test for my family. And you would think that taking a lie detector would be the easiest thing in the world to do, but it's not. There are an awful lot of hoops that you have to jump through. You can't be on drugs, you can't be on medication, you certainly can't suffer with certain medical conditions. And I tried the two best companies in Europe first, but when they found out the subject matter, they absolutely refused to test me. Funny that, eh? But when I did find somebody, I found the best forensic polygraph examiner in the country, that the US police use, the state and federal Canadian government use, and our government use, and the military use across the world. And I used them specifically so they couldn't discredit my lie detector. And I wasn't just tested once, I was tested 3 times. Had I lied about any of the content of my statement? That's in my entire statement. I said no. Had I lied about any of the details? That's details. I said no. Was I lying about any of my observations? And I said no. The equipment used is called a Lafayette 5000. It is the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art equipment anywhere in the world. And I passed to prove what I said I saw was real, and what I said I saw was true, because lie detectors work on fact and not fiction, meaning it had to be a real event and not just something I thought or just believed. It had to be an accurate account, because any fabrication or exaggeration would have impacted upon my test and proved to be a lie. But there were no such exaggerations or fabrications. None. The event started for me on Tuesday, the 23rd of February, 2016. With this small grey, this is the plane by the way, twin propeller plane that was flying very low and very slow over my village. Well, I have RAF St Athan just down the road, and we have military vehicles all the time, so I didn't really pay it any mind. It was the next day when Dave, one of my neighbours, came out of his house. I won't say what he said, but he was cursing, he was effing and blinding because it was plane and kept him awake all night. And it was then really that we started to pay attention as to what these little planes were doing. A short while later, this plane would turn up and swap with the first plane. And this went on all day and all night for 3 days. In fact, by the Thursday morning, we had eliminated everything else. Now, Dave wrote to the MOD, he didn't get a response, but he also wrote to Wales Online. Funny that, because they reckon they didn't know anything about it. Please can you find out why the RAF have been constantly flying over our houses for the last 9 hours? This is on the 24th of February. The very next day. They didn't answer either. And when we asked the MOD, don't take my word for it, because to this date, those planes had never been admitted by the MOD as having actually been there. We asked the MOD, and this is what they said. The MOD holds no information within the scope of your request. None. They don't even admit those planes were there at all. But they never left the airspace unwatched, not even for a minute, day and night. And you know, when someone's pointed something out to you, a sound, that's what you can hear. Every 15 minutes, this little twin prop plane flying over the top of my house. And by Thursday morning, we had eliminated everything else. They were clearly watching for something. Now, Dave was convinced that they were watching for Russian planes for some reason. Well, we had no idea of what was going to happen. So we decided we'd check the radar. What we did, this is the radar. And Pentyrch is under here. And some have insinuated, like Richard Hall, that the event actually happened in Pentyrch, which is over here. It was definitely over Pentyrch. We checked from my IP address to find out what these planes were. And there was no data available. And they closed the entire country's airspace. Not just South Wales, the whole of Wales. So we checked the radar again and got closer to the time. The yellow dot is Pentyrch and the red dot is Pentyrch. And clearly, they were doing this figure of 8 over our homes, and then occasionally they would fly out into a big circle and then they'd come back and continue this figure of 8 pattern. So Thursday evening we decided we'd go out and watch with them to find out what they were looking at or looking for. And it got to about 2 o'clock in the morning, and to be honest it was freezing. We'd had the fire bit lit, it was getting late, about 2 o'clock. I saw this, I'm going in, nothing's happening. And this turned up. Very low, very slow, and very, very loud. This is the plane, a NATO plane, supposedly involved in a small military exercise in the back of South Wales, yeah. So because this plane had turned up, we decided we'd watch a little longer. And this plane started to circle, not little circles. So we estimated it took about 5 minutes for this plane to go around once. Now I live on top of a mountain and you can see in every direction but north, because that is where the mountain actually is. 7 times this plane went around. 7 times. before the first red light was visible, high above the trees behind my house. And I shouted for Dave, and I shouted for Donna, one of my other neighbours who was watching with us that night. She'd gone in the house to make hot chocolates. And Dave and I jumped over the small wire fence and ran to the gate that overlooks the farmland behind my house. And one red light turned into three. And before our very eyes, a pyramid coming in, point first, on the oblique angle, with a leading set of 6 lights on its underside being brighter than the rest, turning very slowly anti-clockwise, and as it did so came down in a pendulum motion until it righted itself in front of us. And when it did, a green object shot out of the top, really fast, and just stopped, skipping from side to side, waiting and watching for something. It clearly knew we were there. The pyramid itself started to list to the right-hand side, and still turning very slowly anti-clockwise, started to go back the way that it had come. This thing didn't come down from outer space. This thing appeared in the space. It didn't decloak. It came into our world gradually. First one light, then another. Like you're approaching another vehicle in fog. And as you get closer so you see it's a car. No, it's a lorry, because there are more lights behind it. And that's what this was like. The pyramid, to me, appeared like it was coming down. But the truth was, the field rises to the north and is the foot of the Garth Mountain. And I stood on the 5-bar gate to get a better look through the bare trees, because it's still winter time. And I was fixated on it because it was coming down. I've described it like a hand of lightning came out of this craft. And the whole thing lit up really brightly. And the bottom lights became white-orange. And it illuminated so much, it illuminated parts of the side of the ship, showing that it was in fact a solid craft and not just a string of lights. Now, I've said previously it was like a hand of lightning that reached out to touch the ground, but it was more like a plasma ejection to try and stop it from itself from touching the ground. And I heard the military planes coming, 2 big C-17 planes, American planes. And I looked away for a moment as they flew over the top of me, and when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore. But the green object was still there. The green object has moved from my left to my right in front of us, and these 2 C-17s flying side by side flew towards it. 2 C-130s, big Hercules aircraft, came from my left side, and they also turned and went back behind the 2 C-17s. So now you had 2 C-17s in close and 2 C-130s out wide, and between them they took up an awful big lot of airspace, like they were trying to herd this green object towards a specific area. Now this green object has flashed at these planes 3 really bright strobes and seemed to get excited somehow that we were following it, and skipped away. I've described it like a happy puppy or a happy child seeing a tree for the first time, but proper excited that we were following it. We watched the green object until we couldn't see it anymore, with the 4 planes behind it completely bathed in green light, brighter than the moonlight, and it outlined all the engines and the fuselages of these 4 planes, a scene out of a movie somehow. When we couldn't see it anymore, the E3 Sentry was still above us, but we could see something red moving behind the tree line. And Dave had said, and I'm glad that he was with me, because I've described this pyramid as being so big it was like a high-rise building that leant into our world from somewhere else and went back the way it came. And while I was fixated on the bottom, I couldn't see the top. Such was the size of it. And Dave said he saw 15 or 20 of these orb-shaped objects come out of the top of this thing. And they just seemed to hover around the very top of it, dancing with each other almost, before the pyramid went back. Now, I didn't see any of those, and I could stand there and tell you that I did, but I genuinely didn't, because I was fixated on it touching the ground. We saw these red objects moving behind the tree line, and from out of the darkness, these 2 red barrel-shaped objects started moving away across the fields towards us. One going across from my right to my left and stopped above the hedge about 30 feet up, if that, and about 30 feet away, if that. And I stared at it just for a few seconds because I wanted the details, I wanted to see. And I could see all these little black dots jumping around like white noise on a TV screen. And then I looked to see where the other one was, but the other one hadn't stopped, and by that time, that is right next to the oak tree, right next to me, I waved. I didn't know what else to do, but that has to be the universal symbol for hello, and I don't mean you any harm. This red barrel came over the top of us and stopped. I continued to wave it. It was only a few seconds, but this thing changed from red to green like as quick as that, like somebody flicked a switch. There was no noise from these things, no downdraft, no nothing. But I felt like I'd been touched, like something reached inside of me and took the fear away. I can't explain it any other way than that. And this is a picture of the gate from the field side, and I've tried to reenact this because where I'm standing in this picture is where that red object was looking at us. I was standing on the gate here, and the other object came right in here. So I don't know how close that is, but that's pretty damn close. This is obviously the branch that it was above. It's a picture by Vincent Palmer that this is the closest thing to the actual event. If this red barrel was in line with the hedge and at the same height as that, this would be accurate to what happened that night. Another view of the gate, just by this tree line. This is where the pyramid was, and I'll try and outline it as best I can, but it actually goes off, the top of the pyramid's up here. There's no way that you could see the top when you were looking at the bottom. And there's a second gate down here, that will become relevant shortly. Anyway. We went back to the first, we walked down to the second gate to see if there were any more of these craft, because the red object had moved to my left and down across the field silently and faded to black. And then now a green object moved to my right and across the houses. No noise at all. And we heard 3 Apache helicopters coming, moving from my left to my right across these fields in a pyramid formation, 3 of them. Their big red, slow, pulsing lights coming out in front of them. And you could see all the trees and the grass and all the shrubs and everything moving under the force of their rotor blades. And Dave and I ran around the front of the houses when they'd gone out of sight to see if we could see up the valley to get a better look at these things. And by the time we got there, the Apaches were already out of sight. So we went back to my house for a hot drink. I'd never been so cold in my life. Dave went home and I went to bed, and I don't know, tossed and turned, and we heard an enormous explosion from the direction of Pentyrch, which is approximately 5 miles away from me. Now I don't know how or when I fell asleep, but the next morning I woke up early, wired completely, and Dave came to my house, Steve came to my house, and Donna came to my house, and we went over to the landing field, or near landing field, to get a better look, to see, expecting to see burn marks on the ground, to be honest. And when we got there, all of the gorse bushes and all of the trees that this thing had gone over had had the life sucked out of them, completely. Here are the comments that I made on Wales Online. This is on the day. I'll read it from the computer. Thanks for sharing, but I can categorically state this was no exercise. Last night I saw absolutely everything, and what they were chasing were not planes. I will take a lie detector anywhere for anyone, but what I witnessed last night will stay with me for the rest of my life. What is more, the military knew they were coming and had a spotter plane in the air for 2 days waiting for the event. And when it came, 4 planes chased the green object, whilst the spotter plane circled approximately 6 red oval objects which formed a pyramid shape. Several red spheres hovered silently above the fields until the helicopters came. I had a couple of debunkers, and one of them called himself the Smoking Man. Well, if this is not ET related, why call themselves? And I love a bit of sarcasm, me. So yeah, okay. Yeah, it is good. Yeah, it is good. In fact, it was amazing. Apt that you should use the name the Smoking Man. After all, isn't it his job to debunk real events? Answer this: when do they use live ammunition in a residential area, in an exercise in a residential area? Answer: never. Never. And one other thing, they may have chased and shot down the green object, but they didn't get the red ones, did they? They were all still there. And then his mate got involved. Agent Fox Mulder. You couldn't write it, honestly. Well, anyway, people have said, well, there must have been loads of stuff on social media. Oh, there was. Loads of stuff. I'm assuming this was your chopper that kept us awake for hours on end. What's going on? Nightmare. There was an explosion at three-ish. At one point, there were 3 helicopters. Yeah, did you hear the 2 loud explosions too? Yeah? I'll leave it up there for you to see the rest, if you like. And the smell, like burning rubber. And this went on. What went off on Pentyrch Common at 4 AM? And again, talking about the explosions. What really made me interested was this one. This is Wales Online. Bearing in mind they'd already been told about this on the 24th. But apparently, they were still working on a story about this. Well, you'd have thought if this was a military exercise, the media would have known. Apparently they didn't. Well, because of these comments, this was our starting point, the very same morning, to go out to Pentyrch Common for my own self. Because I wanted to know what happened to this green object. I wanted to find the impact crater. So we went to Pentyrch Common. And when we got there, this is from the MOD by the way, we've noticed that there had been a meticulous metal search that had gone on the common that night. Metal that had been on the common for tens of years, bits of old car, had all been neatly collected and stacked along the roadside. So we asked the Ministry of Defence why they did a meticulous metal search at 3:30 in the morning on Pentyrch Common, hovering over people's houses. And they claimed Section 26 defence, not in the public interest. I find that awfully strange, as the metal didn't belong to the MOD. Why they wouldn't tell us why they did this search. Well, Steve drove me over there, and Dave went over in his own car. And Dave had taken photographs on the phone that he had with him on the night, that very night. But none of our phones would turn on. When we stood at the gate trying to film these things, our phones would not switch on. We'd gone home, managed to get a bit of charge in it for the next morning, gone out to Pentyrch Common and taken photographs of the metal that was cut up and neatly placed along the roadside. Now, okay, this is Pentyrch Common on both sides of this road. This is the road that they clearly stacked everything against. This is the hospital, the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, that will come slightly later. And just by the side of it here, you just start to see the beginning of it, is a huge wooded hill called Smilog Woods. This is Pentyrch Common, and all the metal is stacked up along this roadway, all the way along. This is Smilog Woods, and it goes on for miles. Now I saw a couple of dog walkers and I asked Steve to pull the car over, bearing in mind this is the morning after the night before, to ask them if they had seen anything. I was told that the first explosion was an air explosion, and the second one had come from Smilog Woods. Now I'm not from that area, so I asked where Smilog Woods were, and felt very stupid when he pointed to this very large wooded hill that rises behind the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. So immediately we went to Smilog Woods. Now because I knew the trajectory of the green object, we know roughly where to start looking. But Smilog Woods runs on for miles, and would take a whole team an entire day to search the whole place. So Steve and I went, and it wasn't long before we found the debris trail. And I'll get to that slide later. I've added this slide because this is the trajectory of the green object that's gone over the hospital and into Smilog Woods. And I also added this radar picture because this is ZZ418 or Snake 48, the very first grey plane that I showed you. But it's a very secret plane. So not only has it dropped in altitude and airspeed, but it's not just circling anywhere. It's circling Smilog Woods. And not just anywhere in Smilog Woods, but the exact impact site. Coincidence? I think not. Steve and I went up to Smilog Woods, and it wasn't long before we found the debris trail. And there were huge branches that had been snapped off the canopies of the trees in a straight line. And branches lay left and right of us for as far as the eye could see. So we decided we would go back and tell the others what we found, because it was getting late, it had been a long day. And we hatched the plan to go up the very next morning to follow this debris trail through to its end and find the impact crater. And this is what we found. To the untrained eye, this might not look very much at all, but there are 60-foot trees snapped mid-trunk. Mid-trunk. Physical impossibility in nature. I got some close-ups of this. We went up for our own benefit. Not because we thought there'd be a big investigation, but because we wanted to know. And I don't believe this thing touched the ground. I believe that every tree that green object hit, it slowed down. And it wedged itself in these trees.
That's what that's for. Somebody's burnt that tree up there. I don't know if we can get up there and get a sample of that. That would be good. That's a burn, isn't it? That's an explosion burn.
Yeah. So,
taking that tree out and snapped it clean. Damage on the floor. This trunk. It's snapped clean off of that end. It's snapped now. You can see it through there.
To take a close-up of just one of these tree trunks. It's 12 inches thick, this trunk, and this trunk has shattered, exploded. And it's a healthy tree. There are two in this picture, one going across this way out. And this is where it's come from. 20 feet in the air. Something hit these trees hard. To break one tree is bad enough. To break 6 is an impossibility in nature, just to affect these few trees in this one area. Hurricanes and tornadoes can snap trees, but it would have covered a much larger area than just this impact site. Just to break one of these small trees would be hard enough. But to snap a 60-foot tree, 12 inches thick, mid-trunk, it's not going to happen. The canopies of these trees are still missing. They're snapped off, not cut. And to give you an idea of how high this is, this thing came in at altitude and slammed into these trees, hard. There were burn marks on the trees. This doesn't really give it justice. You can see how bright orange it is, but there was a white stripe that went through the centre of these things. And the other thing that was evident was all these scuff marks, you see them? On all the trees all around. And here are scuff marks on the trees. But what's interesting, I tried to enhance this one. This is a 2-foot by 1-foot wound. And the wood has curled outwards towards you, implying something very big and very heavy has been pulled upwards against that tree to make that wood curl outwards towards you. Now, when Swansea got involved, the National Resources for Wales had felled all the trees that this green object had touched. So I asked Gary to put in a Freedom of Information request to National Resources Wales to find out why exactly they felled these trees. And they told us it was large disease. Phytophthora ramorum, large disease. Now this disease is so infectious and has started to affect other breeds of plant that they have very, very strict rules and protocols on how to deal with this stuff. They have to wear coveralls on their feet and on their bodies, and they have to do what they call a sanitised felling, which means that everything has to be removed. Now, I was lucky enough, I found it. This place called Lickey Hills in Birmingham used to be a beautiful arboretum, a beautiful woodland walk. And unfortunately, they really did have large disease. And they had to clear everything away. And I mean everything. It's gone. It's like a barren wasteland. But more than that, they put up lots of warning signs. You know, we would ask visitors to help us in our efforts to stop this disease. You know, cleaning your shoes, wheels and dog's paws so as not to spread this pathogen. But there's nothing for Smilog Woods. Nothing. And what's more, this is not sanitised felling. This is what Smilog Woods looks like today. Now, according to their own rules, they have to leave this land free and fallow for a minimum period of 3 years. But they've replanted it already. And I've highlighted some of them for you to see. In amongst all of this debris, they have replanted all these new saplings. Does that look like a sanitised felling to you? Or is it just me? Again, this is Smilog Woods, and the debris, the trunks, the trees, and all the new saplings that are highlighted by the sunlight that they've replanted already. Smilog Woods impact area looks like this today. Everything in this area is dead. Nothing grows there. And we believe that high EMF readings are responsible for that. We've gone up there, we've done the test, we know there are high EMF readings. All of the branches inside this area are dead. Nothing grows. I've also done is included a couple of examples for you as to what EMF can do to trees. And I think you'll find this quite dramatic and quite evident, the effects that EMF can have on trees. And again, by cell towers, trees die. I'm moving on slightly. Shortly after the event, we had some very strange men and women come and camp in the fields behind my house. Now, I didn't know that they were there. They were camped behind this thicket of trees, and it was only because of the local Pentyrch hub that I actually found out they were there at all. And what really piqued my interest was they'd given different explanations as to what they were doing there. Firstly, they told the residents they were a fracking survey team. Well, that went down well with the residents, I can tell you. Not. And then they said that they were doing a military exercise in case of an emergency situation. I think they had to say that because they were caught wearing uniform, carrying guns. And lastly, they told us that they were Vodafone. Okay. Steve said, because Steve and I went over, I wanted to go over, but I didn't want to go over on my own. And Steve had said, we walked over to the gate and saw two soldiers in full digital camouflage walking towards us along the trail. We walked through the gate towards the soldiers, and one soldier said, we're doing a military exercise in case of an emergency situation down in the fields, if you see anything funny going on. The dog was pulling on the lead, and the other soldier had bent down to stroke her, and as he did, his jacket fell open that he had propped under his left arm and exposed a gun. This gun did not have a yellow cap in the end. This gun had not been dragged on exercise anywhere. It looked brand new. like it had been stripped and oiled that morning. But the fact is, they did not have yellow caps, implying they were carrying blanks. So I think they were carrying live ammunition. Now I wanted to go round and see their campsite. And if it wasn't, by the way, if it wasn't for these few pictures that we have got, and this is their campsite, there would be absolutely no evidence that these people were ever there at all. Now you can take the man out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the man. These tents are in perfect line. There isn't a drawstring out of place. First of all, we've got all their bivvies, obviously. Then we have, this is the equipment tent. Behind that we have the canteen tent. And behind that we have the tent where the commanding officer sat. And I'll tell you a little bit about him, because we had a very interesting conversation. As it was supposed to be Vodafone. Now, Steve and I started to do a little walk around, initially, around the perimeter of the field, but I got a little bit bored. I wanted to get closer, I wanted to see, because I'm a bit like that, you know. So we've cut across the field, and as we did so, this big dog has come charging out of one of the tents. I don't know what breed it was, but I asked Steve to pick my little dog up because I didn't want her to get bitten, and shouted at these two men that I could see in the commanding officer's tent. "You're no country boys, are you?" And I had an answer. "What?" Well, that was it. I walked straight up through the middle of their camp to their commanding officer. Said, "This is lambing season, I suggest you put your dog on a lead. The farmer's got a shotgun, he's a very good shot, and he ain't afraid to use it." So one guy's standing, very slim, and an older man seated, that seemed to have this large laptop device in front of him, but it wasn't a laptop. He used two hands to close the lid and looked over the top of his half-moon glasses at me. So I asked them who they were, and they told me they were Vodafone. So within 10 minutes, we'd been told two different stories. One, they were doing a military exercise, or two, they were Vodafone. Okay. So I've gone back to my house. Donna popped in, she's my next door neighbour. Wasn't happy that we hadn't got that many photographs, grabbed my little dog and off she went again. Only this time, Donna got really close. Behind my house and at the end of a trail, there's a disused quarry. And the road to the quarry is lower than the road above, and she managed to get around and underneath these people to hear what they had to say. They were clearly looking for something. Hurry up, find it. What were they looking for? Or wearing cami trousers. And this emblem, which is very interesting, happened to be on the news quite recently. Did anybody see it? About the worms in space. They spent the worms into space because of muscle degeneration in astronauts or something. Yeah, these are space people. Anyway, they had big tarpaulins up, they didn't want anyone to see what they were doing, and they behaved very strangely. Donna said they were searching the fields wearing forensic suits. Right, what were they looking for? But when anybody would walk past, they would stop what they were doing and stare at you until you were out of sight, like some weird 60s cult movie. Really strange. Dave had gone over, and he said, we took a walk over the fields to have a look at what they were doing. Tents and lots of equipment there. They had a satellite dishes, huge aerials, lots of other tech and screens and wires. I did try to ask one bloke what was going on, but he was very reluctant to tell me anything and kept looking behind him as if to make sure there was nothing in my sight. After realising this man didn't want to speak to me, I walked on and looked back, and he was still staring at me as if to make sure I'd left the field. Not many people from Vodafone behave that way, I don't think. So I asked Gary, because this is how I think, let's speak to the local planning department and find out who these people were. So we asked them what applications were granted to anyone for the use of the land in these fields. And he actually searched from January of 2015 until the 31st of December 2016 to give them a full 2 years. And there were no applications for a change of use, which was certainly been for said campsite. And there were no applications for a survey for those fields. And any privately owned company, including Vodafone would have had to have had planning permission. The only people that could have done this without any police interference were the military. And as a resident, I certainly wasn't told that this was going on. So who were these people? We've asked the Ministry of Defence, and recently, who were these people and what were they doing? They told me they were looking for mock mines. Bearing in mind they told me they were Vodafone. I said, you often send civilians to look for mock mines, wearing paper suits. It's a sure way to find them. Anyway, that evening, Steve and I, and a couple of other people that had an interest in the case, came down. We decided to do a bit of sky watching. So we stood there with cameras, and the young guy that was in the tent earlier that evening was security. Later found out he was a close protection officer, but he was security for their camp. And I could see him walking around in camp on his own. And he noticed us and came over to find out what we were doing. So I said, oh, we're sky watching. Are you here because of the UFO? And he said, oh no, we don't know anything about that. But he didn't ask anything about it either. And I found that was really strange. So after we spoke for about 5 minutes and I found out that he was a security officer, the rest of the group had come back. I don't know where they'd been, out to lunch or getting debriefed somewhere. So he'd gone back to the camp with all of these other people, and then 2 minutes later he'd come back to me and said, will you be here for long? I said, well, I will be here for as long as the sky is clear. He said, well, my commanding officer is not going to like that. Commanding officer? I said to Steve, I didn't know Vodafone had a commanding officer. He said, well, I'll have to go and get him. I said, you go and get him. I said, that would be great, I'd love to speak to him. Now, bearing in mind, and I do apologise for what I'm about to say, I had post-traumatic stress, Frank. Came out, you're trespassing. I went, no. I said, that's public footpath. He said, no. He said, that's a public footpath, and got quite animated. I said, you're joking, that's 12 feet away. The only thing the country code desires me to do is take my rubbish home. So we had this little conversation about freedom and fascism. In fact, I'll tell you what I said. Because I haven't said this publicly other than in my statement. I said, we fought 2 world wars, so we'd have the right to be free. And as long as I'm not breaking the law or hurting anybody, I've got a goddamn right to be here. I didn't like it very much. I went on to say about the fascist war movies and show me your papers, so I don't have to show you anything. I've got a right to be here. And with that, he said, I like your passion. Well, it's not passion, it's my right, and people don't know the difference these days. Well, within 2 minutes, there was a big weather front coming. When you live on top of a mountain, that means the rain's coming. So Steve packed up his camera, and we went back to my house, and literally within 5 minutes, the heavens opened, and it would have been very wet and very cold for them. Now, before I introduce Gary, who will present the evidence to you, now I ask you to look at the evidence without prejudice and with an open mind. Our governments have placed a huge burden upon our servicemen and women who are forbidden to talk about this. Are there fallen heroes in this conflict who have ironically given their lives for us? Were the people we're not supposed to know anything about? And what would they say to us if they could? Because every pilot, co-pilot, crew member and boots on the ground saw more than I did that night. But I saw it too, and I am not bound by the Official Secrets Act. I didn't choose this path. They chose me. I was just a normal person with a normal life. I've gone over and above what would normally be expected of a witness to do. And as a primary witness in a court of law in this country, I wouldn't have to take a lie detector test. But I did, to prove the truth. And just by telling you the real truth today, I have fulfilled my duty as a human being to all human beings on this planet, and to all of you. Mahatma Gandhi said, many people, especially ignorant people, want to punish you for speaking the truth, for being correct, for being you. Never apologize for being correct, for being years ahead of your time. If you are right and you know it, speak your mind. Speak your mind, even if you're in the minority of one. The truth is still the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, Today you have heard the truth. And I will swear it right here and right now, it is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And I think it's time to call for the governments of the world to do the same, to tell the truth. And if they don't have the gravitas to tell you, I will. The policies of denial have to stop, because I've seen the truth, and I've seen the military response, and I've seen how we as a race are being represented. And if we're facing a threat, then we as a race have a goddamn right to know. And if we're not, then I say as a human being, not in my name. Some would argue that disclosure would shatter the very fabric of our society. But I believe it would enhance it in so many ways and provide a direction for our children in the sciences and technology that we will need for our tomorrow. And why? The future is right now, and it's already here. We have to embrace and adapt to deal with it now. Because we were very foolish and naive to believe that all life forms are benign. And I would certainly believe that it would bring us together as a race if we are indeed facing an extraterrestrial or interdimensional threat. We are one planet, and we are one race. This was a huge UFO event, possibly the biggest in the country, and maybe even the world. It was totally impossible for anyone to be mistaken, and I absolutely did not lie. And I say again, the 26th of February 2016 categorically was not a military exercise. It was real time, real life, and I got the lie detector results, the witnesses, and the evidence to prove it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for coming. It's been an incredible year looking into the Pentyrch Incident, and I think that what you've just seen from Caz Clarke clearly demonstrates that. Now, there are not many people who will go to this length to come out and speak about an event like this. And as you've already seen, Caz has told you that she's been threatened, and that many people have tried to tell her, maybe not directly but indirectly, don't talk about this or certain things may happen. But she's been compelled, she's been very brave, and she has just been an absolute fantastic witness. As you saw from her presentation, she has provided a lot of detail, a lot of information, and one of the things you got to see was her polygraph test. And as you've already been told, she fought very hard for this. I was actually there one time when someone agreed to test her, but then later on decided not to. But then Caz finally did find someone who saw the results. She was tested 3 times on multiple questions, and she passed. As you know, she was truthful with no deception indicated. Now, as for me as an investigator, or for any investigator, this makes Caz Clarke an excellent first-class witness, because not many people will actually be willing to undergo a polygraph test, let alone find someone with the determination she put forward to actually prove herself as being honest. Now, some people have said to me online and other places where I've given these lectures that a polygraph is not valid. Well, I say nonsense to that, because the one thing I know about polygraph tests is that it's designed to detect fraud or deception. And in this case, there was none. And I will say this, we've been doing this investigation now for over a year. Hundreds of questions. Lots of talks with Caz and the other people who have witnessed many things. The other one being Dave, for instance. But Caz is the one that's been the most forward. And if she was indeed lying about this, you've got to understand this is such an intricate, detailed case. At some point you're going to figure it out that they're lying to you. In this case, it's the opposite. Caz has been straight up, forward from the very start. And to do what she's doing, I think she's very brave. Now, as you heard, this incident took place on February 26, 2016. SUFON didn't get involved until beginning of October 2017. And there's a reason for this. We tried to find Caz Clarke. I was actually at the Rich Planet event when she gave to the audience what happened that night during the Q&As. But the trouble was that she was being swamped by so many people that I couldn't possibly get to it at that time. But I thought, it's okay, there's bound to be a story online sooner or later and we'll get it that way. And there was. The Wales Online article came out. Caz Clarke had been making a comment. And I knew she was using a Facebook account because that's how that comment was getting on there. But when I actually went to Facebook to find her, couldn't find her anywhere. That's not because she wasn't on Facebook, it was like someone was intentionally keeping her away from us, keeping her name or account suppressed some way. I went to many other groups, I asked many other people, could you please find this lady? I really would like to talk to her. Because it's not until you actually speak to a witness, or witnesses, that you actually have an idea of what the case is or how you're going to move forward. But once we finally got involved, myself, Mike Maunder and Emlyn Williams, along with Caz Clarke and her friends, we began to really nail this case down to what really happened. And once we spoke to them, got statements and various other things, it was a case of, okay, we have to now do an EMF test. Anyone who's ever been involved in a case, a UFO case, or even read about one, whenever these craft appear, whether it's in a farm, a field, up on a mountainside, you take an EMF meter where this thing was, you go into the zone, and suddenly there's a difference in the actual electromagnetic radiation. That's something to do with the power of this craft or what makes it go. I don't know exactly how it works, but when you actually look at the history cases of others, this is what actually happens. So we decided to go into these fields, take an EMF meter with us, and just see what we could find. Now, this is the EMF meter that we used. It's a very basic model. Of course, you can get it from any electronic store or online. But one thing that it is calibrated for is indoors and out. And the unit of measurement that it uses is what we call, or what is called, microtesla. I will get to that later so you can understand better what I'm coming at. This particular one, with these red flashing lights, flashes at 0.4 microtesla because according to the studies from EMF, anything about that level or above is harmful to humans. And long-term exposure causes you a number of problems. Now, also the one thing that we needed to make sure of when you're actually scanning these fields is that you're not getting false readings or a false positive. And as you can see, there is Mike Maunder there with a metal detector, making sure that there wasn't anything underground, like underground cables or maybe some old metal pieces that may have been given us a false reading. It is possible, but we found nothing. And a funny little story about this electrical line is that Emlyn one time, he was actually using the meter like this. Looking down, not up, yes. And he thought, wow, got a hell of a reading here. That's the one by there, look, 1.56. And I was like, look above you, Emlyn. But at least that told us it was working. At least that told us that was like a good field test for us. Anyway, these are just some of the pictures that we took during our many times in these fields. This particular tree is of something of interest, I find, because it shows the classic signs of EMF damage. And this is the path of where this large craft would have passed over. And it looks like that this particular tree has had some damage. But if that's not enough to show what we're talking about, when we first started to scan these fields, just to get an idea of what we were looking at, this particular bush here, you can see along there, it's all nice and green. But as you get more into this area where that red orb would have been floating above, you can see that the leaves on this particular branch of bushes has actually died or dead or will not grow. It's like something specific, and we found a signal right there, and I'll show you on a map later on. But this is probably the most interesting of all the observations we made from the Pentyrch fields. This is what we call a bald patch. It's a very sizable area. It's starting to grow back now, but if you look at it here, you can see this very dull green, very distinct patch amongst all these weeds of grass. Now, one thing I understand is what gives grass its colour and allows it to grow is something called, I believe, chlorophyll. And what happens when these particular craft get involved is that they tend to suck the actual chlorophyll out of the grass, or they seem to cut it off somehow. affects it greatly. And you can see there the borders along the field. This particular gorse bush here has undergone EMF radiation of some high intense energy. Now, what you have to understand is that in this particular area, this is where Caz Clarke has told us many times now, when that corner of that craft moved across the field, and that hand of lightning, as she called it, like it was trying to stop itself from falling to the ground, came out like that. This is exactly the area where it was. That exact area. And I tell you another story with Mike Maunder. He was standing in this field when we were actually mapping this out. It's just about the point there, the highest point. Holding the meter like this, don't even have to move, and the thing was going off at near enough 1 microtesla. That's actually very high for an outdoor signal, because that's not occurred naturally. And it's just going off like that, 1, 2, 3, beep, 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 just not doing, it was just a very high signal. And this was 21 months, 22 months after the actual event, and even now, 2.5 years, nearly 3 years after the event, there are still signals in that field. Not caused naturally, something artificial. Now, once it became clear that we couldn't possibly just mentally map it out, we had to go into these fields, do what we call a grid search, which is going backwards and forwards along all these fields, up and down, left and right, trying to find out exactly where this thing is going off at the 0.4 mark that we were getting. And what I will draw your attention to is the very long yellow line that follows all the way up and then sort of curves over and ends up right in the ball patch there. Now, when we first started meeting Caz and Dave, Caz in particular said that this thing, this huge pyramid craft, had followed from the one corner of the field and moved across and then back, and then that hand of lightning came out. Now, she told us that before we even found this, which is something that corroborated not only what she saw, but with fieldwork investigation, you can see some of these signals are very high. They go up to 0.59, some of them go to 0.77. Those are the ones we just logged for that day. Other times we would get them about like as high as 1. Very, very unusual indeed. And you can't naturally put that kind of signal in there. You know, no one person or a group of people is going to come along and just leave a funny trail for us to find. It's not that easy to do. You can't do it. This had to be something large and unprecedented, like what you saw, what Caz saw that night. Now, once we had an idea of how big this trail was, we could sort of make some estimates as to how big this thing could have been. As you heard Caz say, if you looked at the bottom, you couldn't see the top, and it was so wide it couldn't even fill your field of vision. So, just how big was it? Well, if you look from the bottom corner there, just up to where that tree was you saw in the earlier picture, the distance measures around 282 feet. That's when it's standing upright. That's the width of the craft on the bottom there. Now, something to look at here is that when this thing starts to turn, and this could have been an estimate of how wide it was, you're talking 531 feet. Actually an incredibly large craft on its own, but Caz will tell you that this thing was much bigger than that. If you map out the whole distance from ball patch down to the corner, you get a distance of 963 feet or 294 meters. But I thought it would be interesting if we just closed it all in, filled in the space and see what kind of square feet we actually got. And as you can see, you're getting somewhere close to 46,884 feet. That's something floating in a field without any sort of normal engines or propellers, hovering very silently with the military obviously above. And Caz Clarke saw this, and Dave saw this, and this person, I believe, saw it. This is a comment that was found on South Wales Awakening. About a week after the Rich Planet Q&A, where Caz had told that audience what had gone on, because as soon as Caz told that audience, people started going for the mic and wanted to say what they saw that night. Somebody had heard helicopters flying around, some people said the hospital had shaken, the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, lorries or something was on fire, turned over. But this particular person made a rather interesting comment. They called themselves Mike Henry, but I don't believe that's their real name, because we've searched for it, This person obviously lives in Pentyrch, but there's no Mike Hembry living in Pentyrch because we've looked at electoral registers and maybe just tried to go around the area and see if anybody knows who this person is. Now, I'll just come up a little bit because I can't see, but he says here, after the article was online, Wednesday afternoon, I noticed an AWACS radar tracking plane circling our area while I was cleaning the car. An AWACS being an E3 Sentry, as we call it here in Britain. But by 1 AM, Thursday morning, started to get a bit worried as to what was really happening. Anyways, he fell asleep, and guess what? He was still here the next morning and all day and into the night. So he's there from all of Thursday, going into the Thursday morning, leading up to the time when this actually began to happen. And if you come down here, he's now talking about walking his dog, and he starts to see what Caz and David actually see. He says, there were now 5 large planes, all in the same circle, so watch because I thought it was strange. Then, or with that, a bright red pulsing light, then another, and another, which formed the shape of a triangle, came down from the clouds. That's exactly what Caz Clarke told you now, but we didn't know anything about this until October 2017, and this person is putting a comment up on a South Wales Awakening article just 1 week after it happened. There's no way he could possibly know that unless he was there. But he goes on. He says, it shows now the full outline, and this craft had dimmed down black, and then red and green orbs came from within the body of it. At the same time, a green orb shot up in the middle of all the circling aircraft, and it started pulsing very fast, and then slowly headed northwards, going off to Lantrissa. As Caz said to you, this thing got the attention of the other plane circling above, which then moved over to the Lantrissa area. He goes on to say, he's gone home this time now because he's very shaken by it, but he says, it was about 4 AM, there was an almighty explosion in the distance, followed by a second, about 3-4 seconds later, whatever was going on, the MOD were very involved. He doesn't want to be found, but he says, whatever was going on, the military, you'll say this, one thing, they knew that was coming. I agree with that. I agree with that, and I'll show you later on, but I definitely think they know how to track these things. So Mike Hembry is a very interesting person. Now, I don't know if it got mentioned, but there was a lot of... There's a lot of things that we have on the website and in the statements about strange weather anomalies happening in the very areas where these craft appeared. Not just in Pentyrch, but in Smilog. Smilog being where the impact site happened. This is a chart, a weather chart of the very week that this went on. Nowhere in there does it show any kind of snow, blizzard, or icy conditions that are going to occur. But what you're going to see now is a video taken the very next day up in Smilog Woods where the impact site was, and you decide what's going on here, because according to the other witnesses who came and sort of filmed this event, the snow that they saw was like marshmallow balls, or like what you see in one of those seated cushions, polystyrene balls. It's kind of like that. It didn't melt in your hand, it was like very marshmallowy to the touch. I'll just play this video. Basically, what I think is going on there is some kind of high EMF interference modifying the weather in that particular area. If anyone has ever looked at weather modification technology or how our governments are sort of experimenting with this, EMF or electromagnetic radiation is a part of that. And that looks like what's going on there. But one other thing that we decided to do is that we had to map out Smilog Wood. We've done the EMF signals and the tracking for Pentyrch fields. A good way now is to go up to Smilog Woods and see if we can duplicate the same thing there. Find signals. And sure we did. You can see again, look, the 0.4 outdoor EMF meter. These are just some pictures of flags. There's the so-called sanitized felling. And there's some of the other pictures that we took. But look at this. This is an aerial map of Smilog. Obviously with the trees still up there. But this is the impact site. This is the road. And this is what some of the signals we got. But I'll just draw your attention to these blue lines. These blue lines are bike trails. Smilog Wood, the people who own Smilog Wood actually make mountain bike trails for people to ride their bikes down and do insane jumps and stunts and everything. One particular person, his name was Oscar Green, he spoke to me not long after I started investigating. He said to me that him and his friends had a ramp about here, which they would jump and then try to clear that road and then continue on down there. He said he got up there on the 26th. The previous day the ramp was fine. He goes up there on the 26th and the ramp was smashed to pieces. Ramp was perfectly fine the day before, but then he comes up there the next day and he says it's been smashed to pieces. Now I asked him, do you know why that is? He thought the council had done it. Council hadn't done anything. But he also saw the E3 Sentry, so he's another witness to who saw this circling plane. But it's just interesting that somebody is a first-hand witness just to that particular piece of information. Now let me show you what you're looking at here. There's the impact site. This line here, as I said, we did a grid reference search of this area, all surrounding areas. These are the only areas that we got a signal. I want you to pay attention to this yellow line, because if you follow it back, as you saw in the line on that graph with the hospital earlier, that's exactly where the line goes back to. Right back to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, right back to the Common. Indicating that something that was giving off EMF signals caused a loud explosion over there and then went flying in here and impacted that area. Why do I think these signals are there? You may be asking this yourself. Well, they shut down the Smilog Woods area. The army shut it down. They shut the roads down, the paths down, and basically they kept it there all night until the sunrise. And the only reason I can understand why I'm getting signals here is that whatever was in this area, they've dragged it down, left it there, ready for someone to pick up. Helicopters were seen going in and out of the Smilog Wood. Trucks had been going in and out of this. And I'll get to that again. You'll understand why that's important. Just so that you understand where I'm coming from with the EMF. I said it was in microtesla, yeah? The measurement here, 1 to 25, that's milligas. That's another unit of measurement for electromagnetic radiation. If you convert it, it's just divided by 10, it's from 0.1 to 2.5, and that's microtesla there. That's the unit of measurement I was using. And to give you an idea, look, 1 to 25, 0.1 to 25, that's actually a microwave level. So basically, when you're walking into the fields, when you're walking into Smilog Woods, you are being microwaved by electromagnetic radiation. That's not there naturally, not by power lines or telephone lines. Somehow it has gotten there artificially. And I believe, really do believe that that was from the craft, and the green thing that was probably shot down over Smilog Wood. Now, got a lot of freedom of information requests and public responses once this information started to get out there. One of the things I wanted to ask about was this loud explosion, because that was the most unanimous thing I got from talking to the witnesses, is that there was an almighty explosion or almighty loud bang. Some of them said one, others said there was two. So going from experience of looking at other cases, I thought, okay, why don't we contact the British Geological Survey and see if we can find any signals? And I requested that the dates be from the 22nd of February to the 28th of February, just to spread it out. And when I got to Friday, around 4 AM, this is the whole day's graph here for Friday the 26th. This is the line of the graph there. Maybe you can't see it. But when you bring it closer, look, you bring it to 4:21, and oh look, there it is. This was taken from a station in Monmouth, which is 40 miles away northeast of Smilog Wood. According to the army, that's done by a simulated explosion. A simulated explosion, yet somehow powerful enough to shake hospitals and wake people up in their beds. Something that's happened that night when this explosion took place. This Apache gunship was forced to make an emergency landing at Cardiff International Airport just about 13 minutes after this explosion happened. It happened at 4:34. Now, the reason why it landed 10 minutes later or just after that is because when you fly from Llantrysant, the common area, to Cardiff International Airport, it takes roughly about 10 or 11 minutes to actually get there. And this thing was probably the cause of that explosion. I'm certain of it. Timing is impeccable. I had previously thought that the reason why this Apache helicopter had made such a quick run to Cardiff International Airport is because that was the closest one. No. Turns out that Cardiff International Airport is the only place that has a facility to fix these things. This is Mike Hopkins, someone who is a former MOD man. He just basically says that the MOD no longer works at St. Athan to fix military. But there is a 24-hour airfield emergency service at Cardiff Airport. That is why it went there. And it later took off that day, basically with generator fault failure. Some electronic faults caused by an explosion. And just in case anybody wants to check the links, this is a map of St. Athan and the links that Mike sent me, just to confirm what he was saying is true. So, we've got a recorded signal. Witnesses hearing loud explosions at roughly the same time, hospital shaking, and now I want to know what is the cause of this signal because it's now recorded on a seismograph. So I asked the British Geological Survey, could they please give me an explanation? And they basically said that it seems likely that the small transient signal recorded at 4:20 results from a local noise source in the vicinity of the site. This is coming from down Llantrysant area. And as there's no other people working that day, there's no quarry explosions going on, there's no heavy construction, it's right in the early hours of the morning, the only source of that explosion can be the military. And basically there's a couple of questions that we've asked the Ministry of Defence. You know, like why were they conducting metal searches, as you saw with Caz? They claim Section 26. I was more interested in why they had a presence of an E3 sentry, not one, but two. There were actually two there, and I'll prove that to you. They said, again, Section 21, not in the public interest. It's just a military exercise according to them, and they're telling me, sorry, I'm not going to tell you why those things are there. Especially one of them being NATO. And also now I said, can the MOD please provide any details why this helicopter, Apache gunship, which is one of the most reliable helicopters in the world, one of the most powerful, somehow was forced to make an emergency landing on a routine military exercise. They basically said, yeah, it had a cockpit generator failure, but they're trying to tell me that the reason why that smoke was seen in that area for a long period after this explosion happened must have been from the helicopter. No. That thing has already landed at Cardiff International Airport, and whatever the source of that smoke is still around the common area. It's not that. They're basically trying to fob me off, and I'm not having it. Right, this is Linda Moulton Howe. We had some contact with her in December 2017. She saw our case, and Linda has had a long interest in looking at the military involvement with what she called the UFO or alien presence. She's convinced that there is a secret war going on between humanity and extraterrestrials. Basically, she said this: Gary, I think what happened in Wales in February 2016, a year ago, was not a sudden leg of the Scotland border military exercise. It has all the earmarks of what whistleblowers have told me since the 1980s and 90s about a secret war between human military forces and an alien presence. But how to prove it firsthand if any military won't go on the record? However, you and Caz and Mike et al. Have all laid out more than most cases have, and I am looking forward to broadcasting the files in Coast to Coast AM Thursday, December 21st, 2017, and whatever feedback she gives, she'll forward to me and Mike and so on. And she also makes a nice point here. Caz is to be commended for coming forward with her intelligent and detailed observations. Please give her my best. So let's give Caz out there, shall we? And that's just the Coast to Coast show that was broadcast later on that time. Somebody listened to this show. Somebody who worked at the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and actually emailed Linda themselves. And she passed this email back to me. And I'm going to read all of it out because there's a lot of information here. It says this. Hi Linda, I was listening to your very recent December 21st show, 2017, which included yourself talking to Gary from Swansea UFO Network about the incident of high strangeness in and around Lantryston, South Wales. I was on duty as a nurse at the hospital that night, and I can explain what I experienced. I must add that I no longer work at that hospital, and I'm in fact no longer working in the NHS, and it is only now that I can contact you regarding this matter. I believe it was around 2, although it was more closer to 4, when I heard an extremely loud explosion, which sounded like it was right outside the hospital. This was then followed by a smaller explosion, which sounded a little distance away from the hospital. I was on duty with 2 other people who were exactly the same as myself. I have combat experience in the British Armed Forces and can tell the difference between a bang and an explosion. After hearing these explosions, I automatically thought that it was a terrorist attack, as this is a sign of the times we are unfortunately living in. I also contacted hospital security to find out if they were aware of what was going on. Suffice to say, they had no idea what I was on about. I then went outside the hospital to the entrance, and the smoke that was around resembled a foggy night, and it is correct that the smell of sulphur was all around. I didn't see any lights, but there again I wouldn't have seen them due to the smoke. I did, however, hear a lot of noise sounding like aircraft, and also helicopters. I had to go back to my workplace very shortly afterwards, and that was where it ended for me. I phoned security again, and asked them if they had any information concerning what had happened. They told me that it had been a military exercise, and that was it. I don't believe it was a military exercise at all. Basically, for the same reasons, Gari Jones, a member of the staff, informed me that all the roads in the local area were closed by the police, and I can assure you that they must have drafted in police from outside the area. With the cutbacks in the police forces, there are not many on duty at night, and they number around 10 constables and a sergeant in that area. The only mention in the media of the military exercise was this Wales Online news app. The media here is the same as the rest of the UK, in that it has its own narrative and agenda. I don't believe we will ever get to the truth about this incident. To give you an idea of where I was that night, if you go to Google Maps, find the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, go to the satellite and you will see the roundabout just about the hospital. As you come off the round of the hospital, turn left, and there I was at the end of the building of the Thursday. This is where that person was, looking out the back. There's the common, there's Smilog Woods. That's that line of trajectory you showed earlier. Basically, this person is right over the area where this thing would have been shot upon, or something was shot upon, and then heard that explosion around here, which shook this hospital, and then a few seconds later, ended up over there. This person has heard the explosion, and the second one indicating that something has either been shot at and then later impacted something, as we have basically proven that. So, I wrote to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital, the Pentyrch University Health Board which runs it. I just asked them basically, what notifications were you given of this military exercise? Because that was the story we kept getting. Did they have any records? Did anybody phone them? The basic things. They said to me, no emergency measures, services and procedures were undertaken, as no information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital about this exercise. There's something interesting that that woman said, or I think it was a woman. Basically, that person said in their email to Linda, she phoned security first and they didn't know what was going on. And then later on, she phoned security again, and now they're being informed it's a military exercise. So who's basically telling the local area now that this is nothing more than a military exercise? Somebody was shaping the story right after this incident had taken place. So seeing as Smilog Woods was something heavily involved, I asked them basically the same sort of questions. Could they tell me why Smilog Woods was closed? What exactly was it the reason the military were there? Whose authority was it to close it, and why were roads around the area also closed? They said to me there was no permission granted to the military to close the woodland and public paths and let off explosives in the woodlands mentioned during these dates or in any fact any date. So basically they have no record of this. So I wrote to the Royal Mint, seeing as it had been suggested by Richard D. Hall that this exercise involved the Royal Mint. So I actually said the same thing. Can you just give me any idea of how you were notified? Is there any sort of records? You know, just the usual. What procedures did you take and everything else? He said this. Whilst we received prior notification of the training exercises you referred to from the Welsh Extremist and Counter-Terrorist Unit, the Royal Mint had no involvement in the respect of the exercise whatsoever, and our premises were not used in any way. So they had nothing to do with it. So that's case closed. So, seeing as there were reports of fire and smoke and sulphur and explosions, I thought maybe the South Wales Fire Service must know something. Because if you're in the local area and something is going wrong, the emergency services have to be notified or would be interested in getting involved. Basically, they said the same thing. Following the investigation, the service holds no information in relation to the matter detailed in your request, so they don't know. So at this point, I'm getting a little frustrated now because it seems no authority in the area, which was supposed to be a routine exercise, which would have been notified long before this thing happened. I thought I'll write to the police. It's the only people who would probably know now about the road closures, the Smilog Woods, the explosions and everything else. So I did make a much longer reference to material and things that they would have had, calls, records, paper, documents, that sort of thing. When they got back to me, this is the response that they gave me. They're basically saying that your request is being considered and I am not obliged to supply the information you have requested. The reason is Section 14, Paragraph 1, vexatious requests. And if any of you don't know what that is, it's saying causing or tending to cause annoyance, frustration or worry. Right, so I'm asking about a road closure that happened 2.5 years ago, which is supposedly a normal routine military exercise, and they're telling me that it's too much of a bother for them to find out who gave the authorization to close the road, seeing as that they are responsible for law and order and the safety of roads in public in this country. I think they know something and they're not telling me. I have actually requested an internal review for this and they seem to be ignoring that, as they always do. Right, so as you can see, a lot of the actual authorities didn't know anything. So, we're dealing with the military now. The military are heavily involved in this. We are told it's an exercise. So I've just made this question here. When you look at this evidence I'm going to show you, I want you to ask yourself, was this an exercise or real life? First thing I want you to look at is that when I went to the MOD's actual website for listings of actual training exercises, I found a list of everything that they had running that week. But interestingly, when I got to the 25th of February 2016, they've added it, but there's no commence date for it. It's like somebody just slapped it on there and no one was none the wiser. You can see for all the others, they've added it, there's the commence. They've added it, there's the commence date. This one here, they've just stuck it in there and hoped that no one would notice. And it's the same with the RAF. They normally have operational low-flying training timetables and calendars and everything else. They've stuck it on you, but they haven't interested who is the RAF going to be involved. Is it a low-fly training exercise? Again, it's like someone just put it in there and just expected no one else to notice. So it's been nearly 2 years since this event, but I remember not long after it happened, I was investigating this, just online, searching, and I put a little post on one of my Facebook pages, and basically thought nothing wiser of it until I went back to check it, because I remember someone saying about this. This is Paul Gillian. He was asking me all kinds of questions at that time about the Apache. As you can see, the radar returns were very well known early on. And he said something to me that I basically asked him about later. He said, it's strange as well that all of the online records for the archive timetables for low-fly military activity between the 22nd and the 26th of February have been deleted. Like this one, for example, and that's the link he gave me then. Normally, you follow the link, the timetable comes up. You follow this link for that week, status not found. Somebody has meticulously deleted this record for no one to find, and just stuck it up on their timetable as if no one would notice. This is what it normally looks like. There's a few dates look. These are the areas that you'd be looking at. LAF7 is for Wales. That's what it should look like. But basically, for that particular week, someone's deleted it. And there's a lot of evidence like this in the public record, especially with officials in the military that have been deleting records. So now we come to the military itself, the timeline. I was very fortunate to find this, because I thought I would never be able to piece together the military's timeline, because they don't show up on normal internet radar. You can track planes from a couple of years ago commercially, but the military, they don't show up. But I was able to find this. This is like a plane spotter website for military enthusiasts. You have like train spotters and you plane spotters. This is a military spotter. And if you look at the date, this is for the 17th of February 2016, and someone's already saying that a notice to airmen has gone out for Exercise Chameleon, but it's taking place up in North England. It's up in the north of England, not down in South Wales. And somebody's talking about how they're gathering all kinds of equipment now. Basically, 2 Chinooks are coming down from the south of Scotland, all the way to RAF Leeming. This was on the 21st of the 2nd. So that would have been on the Sunday. One of the actual planes that was circling Caz's skies, the Pentyrch area, for days before this event, there's one of them right there, ZG996. This was already at RAF Leeming in North England, waiting to be given its orders to start circling down the bottom. Now, by about Monday, a lot of these call signs were actually involved in the Exercise Chameleon that took place, or the so-called alleged exercise, down in South Wales. These are all of them by there. And as you can see, these planes again, these ones are now actually making their way down to South Wales. And also something else I wanted to point out, this is again on Tuesday. By now the plane is circling around Lantricent and Pentyrch, I should say, 2 of them. But while that's going on, they're up in North England and they're practicing parachute drops. Single and double. And as I showed to you earlier, this is the north of it. This is RAF Leeming here. This plane is taken off on Tuesday at around 20 to 6. It's down in Plymouth. It's down in the Cornwall area here. And interestingly, it's circling around, stops, and then goes somewhere else, and finally decides it's going to spend the rest of its days until this craft appeared, the large pyramid craft, down over Pentyrch. And there's the other plane, ZG996, now getting ready to join its friend down here for the next 3 days. Now this is something I decided to put together because it became clear to me that other cases that I have looked at where military had been involved, some very well-known cases where the military were on site, ready to engage whatever was being appearing there. These are some of the most well-known cases: Berwyn, Nottingham, Rendlesham. These are all colour-coded, look. But what's really interesting is that somebody who done their own research, these are arbor lines for like ley lines or energy centres of the earth. You see here, Plymouth is very well represented in the Cornwall, Truro areas. There's Cardiff, look, Pentyrch. There's another case that I've been looking into. But what's interesting is how all these major cases where military involvement and bases are close to them appear on these lines. Some people think that's not very interesting, but I find it very interesting because the more you look, the more it appears true, because there's Will Slope up there. Now there's a gentleman called Paul Sinclair, who's a UFO investigator and paranormal researcher, and just last year the Express put out an article of a case that he'd been looking into that happened in September of 2009. And the reason why I've concentrated on this for a second is because this particular case has so many similarities to the Pentyrch Incident. And what I'm finding is that the military seem to have some kind of format or some kind of way of dealing with whatever it is that's in us guys that doesn't belong to us, of course, the alien presence. And he said, but then look, one of them said there were 30 to 40 vehicles above and below the sea, and it was bubbling, and there was banging and crashing, and there was silence, and there was also electricity coming from these things going into the sea, like electricity coming from the large craft in Pentyrch. And also, what's interesting is that there was the appearance of Chinooks and other jets and military that landed on the ground and secured the beachhead and basically moved people away. But the reason I've highlighted this is because this gentleman, Paul Sinclair, he's basically asked the MOD in a Freedom of Information request the same sort of questions, why were you there? And if you look at the responses he's getting, it was a routine military exercise, no live ammunition was used, any explosion here were controlled detonations or simulated ammunitions. And the reason why they choose these locations is done because of the landowner's consent. This is what the military said to me, and pretty much the same thing. Blank, simulated ammunition, which mimics the sound of gunfire. Basically, alternative locations with the agreement of the landowner. This is just an automated response. Nobody is actually personally at this machine telling me, answering my Freedom of Information requests personally. It's just an automated response they send out to people and basically send you on your way, fobbing you off, basically. But I just want to get back to the military timeline, because now we're starting to see the appearance of the Chinooks and the Apaches. This is on a Tuesday again, the 23rd of February up in North England. Now by Wednesday the 24th, that plane had been circling for a full day, and the other witness, Dave, that Caz mentioned, said he heard the plane keeping him up, basically annoying him. He decided to write to the MOD and say that woke up to the same noise as we all went to sleep, once again stayed circling all day and did start to wonder, are we under some sort of threat with world tensions as they are? That night, went to bed, and the sound of the plane echoing over our houses. By 11:45, I was pissed off with it, so I decided to email a local MD a shitty email about their plane, keeping me up and my neighbours awake. They didn't reply to me or my email at all, but of course he wrote one to Wales Online, and they knew 2 days prior that this was going on. So now we come to Thursday night. Finally, officially, a known time. A notice to airman goes up. It's pinpointed on Land Crescent. It's basically covering this whole area, 5 miles in every direction. And it's going to run until the 26th of February, the next morning, till 7 o'clock. Now they didn't just shut down this airspace. As you saw earlier, they shut down the entire airspace. By this point, they know something is coming and they're ready, because this is now at the edge of the beacons, the Brecon beacons. This is on the same website, and remember what I showed you earlier about those call signs on those planes? All this, along with the Apaches, the Chinooks, the E3 Sentries, the other two planes, at this point there's about 20 or so vehicles in the air at one time. And I want to draw your attention to something. What you just saw with the last 3 days in North England, that was a military exercise. Done in daylight, with everyone doing their own thing, one after the other. It never happens all together. Never. Except, of course, if there's a real event that they want to take care of. Now, this is a Friday morning at Bryce Norton. I went to their actual website, another one of those military plane spotter websites. These people know how to find out what tail numbers they have because they have certain radios that scan for this kind of equipment. That's one of the E3 Sentries that was involved, and it landed on Friday morning. As you can see with there, look. It landed on Friday morning after spending the night here. Now, how do I know the NATO one was there? This is the one from St. Athan that people keep an eye on. That's the actual log for Thursday morning. That's its tail number, that's the actual plane. You can type it in on a Google image search and this is what you'll find. And as I've already shown with the Mike Henry comment and the guy whose ramp was destroyed up in Smilog, this is confirmed. This NATO plane was actually involved. So why is it that we've got two of these small light planes circling for 3 days along with the E3 Sentry, supposedly involved in a military exercise? And what I found out is that the E3 Sentries and these particular planes are involved in something called ISTAR, which stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, Targeting, Acquisition and Reconnaissance. Basically, it's like a control command center in the sky giving up-to-date information for their forces on the ground or in the air or out to sea. If there's an enemy threat that they want to take care of, these are the people who would be involved in dealing with it, basically guiding their men to deal with whatever threat they feel is necessary. Now, I've listed there some of the E3 Sentry's capabilities. It has land, sky and sea radar, satellite surveillance, electronic jamming and scanning equipment, air command up-to-date information, as well as technical support, targeting of enemy and countermeasures. That's something you can find out about that from here, but what's interesting is this plane. It's a very old plane, but it was brought back into service some time ago and fitted with all kinds of new equipment. And despite my best efforts, I cannot find anything out about that plane except its tail number and that it has some forward-looking infrared. It's got special sensors on it that is so secret that if you go to this website here, this person will tell you directly. It's so secret you don't know what it is. And yet it was in this area for 3 days. And remember what we saw earlier? The green object has gone off to northwest of Lancaster and is now circling around the Smilog Woods area looking for something. Basically, I think it's found where that object had crashed or where it was hiding. Now, a lot of people ask, well, okay, witnesses were there, where are the photographs? Where are the videos? Well, that's not to say that these people didn't try to get photographs or videos. This is Dave's phone, actually. And he said he took his phone out, he tried to switch it on, and he tried desperately to get it to take photographs or switch on. He took the battery out, put it back in. For some reason, this phone just would not switch on. It was like something was intentionally stopping it from switching on. And I reckon it's because either the E3 Sentry or that small plane that's circling above sending out some kind of signal to disable it. Because the very next morning, Dave had actually taken photographs of the metal that was on the common road, and not long after this event, as Caz has already told you, both their emails, their phones, their laptops, computers were all hacked, and all important information relating to that day that could have shed more light on this disappeared. A lot of other things disappeared, like personal photos, but they came back. It's the more important information about that particular night that's never returned. And since then, he's been trying to get this phone to work by sticking new batteries in it, putting a new charger connector on it. For some reason, I mean, it shows the light for charging, but the phone will not switch on. It's like something has fried the electronics and he doesn't know how. But my guess is it's the E3 Sentry or one of those planes with that technology I can't find out about. But that didn't stop Dave from trying to give us some idea of what he saw. Because it's interesting when you read the statements of Caz, she never saw these multiple orbs coming from within the body of this craft. She saw the hand of lightning that was looking at the bottom. Dave saw this, and they both saw the green orb that was hovering above, and he's very kindly done like a sort of animated GIF for you to look at. This is how it appeared, look. Started to come down, then it gets brighter, then all these orbs come out of it, then there's all the other colours, and then, because what he's describing is pretty much what Caz has described and Mike Henry on the road of Pentyrch Road was describing. Again, look, then it lights up, all these multiple orbs start appearing out of it, and that's basically his drawing as well, which he's done for us. But wouldn't it have been amazing? Can you imagine how good it would have been to get that video? Probably would have been the most earth-shattering UFO video evidence of anything. But obviously someone didn't want that to happen. Again, by now, these helicopters have taken off. They're all in Lancaster, they're all in Pentyrch, they're all circling around.
third time he's been around now. Oh yeah, that guy's doing it there. See if I can pick him up. I don't know what's going on. That helicopter and this thing here have been circling around now for about 10 minutes. It's a plane or a helicopter itself, I don't know. Fucking land that thing, please. This guy up too.
I'm just bringing you back to this because there's something now that you have to realise. Again, we have the explosion, as with the seismic signal and eyewitness accounts. We have this helicopter which has now made an emergency landing at Cardiff International Airport. What's interesting now is that while that plane is continuing to circle Smilog, while the Apache is now making an emergency landing and the explosion has already happened, this helicopter here takes off from St. Athan and makes regular trips to and from Lantriston area back to St. Athan as if he was picking something up and bringing it back. And he does this a period of 3 times, and you can see in Dave's statement here, this is a key part of it here. I could only see 2 Apaches after this, but could hear the twin-rotor Chinooks coming from and at St. Athan's in the distance. They were flying back to start Athan, then back to Lantriston as if they were transporting something. This was very loud. And the reason why I showed that purple line on the Smilog Wood earlier is because I believe that whatever they shot down was most likely that green object, and that this thing was transporting it back to the base. There's a reason I suggest this even more. This is a comment that Mike Maunder found. This is a person who'd been following our work, realised that we were onto something very interesting, and he's basically saying that the Apache gunship that landed at Cardiff Airport was something of interest, but he's also, just this part here, he says something that was also very interesting was the arrival and departure of a plane designated BAE 146 from RAF Northolt. Nothing out of Northolt is boring, and flights from there to Cardiff Airport are very, very rare and scheduled. That aircraft does not only fly high-level benefits claimants, its call sign is Kitty Hawk, it's UK military specific, and he moves all sorts of people around. You're talking the very high brass people now. And there it is, but there, that's the plane. That's its actual record. It landed on the very same day, the 26th of February, but in the evening, at it's almost coming up just after 5:30. And it stays there for about roughly 2 hours and takes off sometime around 25 minutes past 7. So I'm just going to ask yourself now, why is this plane, which very, very rarely makes any kind of stop at this RAF Athen base, which carries the most high-level claimants around, come into this place where a routine military exercise is, but turns out to be an actual UFO interception by the military? None of this makes sense. The excuse of a military exercise does not fit this. So let's just look at some conclusions. I mean, we've got evidence of powerful explosions, smoke and sulphur smell. We've got broken trees and canopies. We've got the Royal Glamorgan Hospital shaking. We've got EMF evidence, matching course and directions. We've got a polygraph test showing truthful and no deception indicated. We've got the MOD not acknowledging the presence of ZG996 or ZZ418 to this day. We've got closures of roads, including the M4 motorway, strange weather anomalies such as the weird snow, a massive military and NATO presence, which is never usually found in normal military exercises, seismographic signal which confirmed the explosions, strange men in uniforms carrying guns and wearing forensic suits, hacking of phones, computers and emails. And according to the official sources of the Ministry of Defence and local mainstream media, the cause for the activity on the 26th of February 2016 in Pentyrch and Lantriston was the result of a routine military exercise codenamed Chameleon. However, let's look at the evidence and see what has been established. If you consider what you have heard from Caz Clarke and how the experiences that transpired that night, her testimony, which was proven truthful, provided in the form of a certified polygraph test that she witnessed that night, has to be based on fact. You've seen the radar returns showing the two planes have circled the skies of Pentyrch and how they've never left the skies alone for a period of 3 days and nights. And despite evidence of their presence, the MOD has never offered any explanation or even confirmed that they were there. Now you've seen how a normal, routine military exercise takes place. Typically, it's over a couple of hours or even days in broad daylight, with individual teams and vehicles, never all at once. This did happen, however, on 26th of February 2016. Multiple helicopters and planes ranging from Apaches and Chinooks to E3 Sentries were all airborne in Pentyrch, ready and waiting for whatever action they were waiting to take that night. The evidence you have seen from Caz Clarke and myself shows very convincingly, once the huge pyramid-shaped craft had appeared in the fields, the military leapt into action. We may not have been able to witness firsthand the pyramid-shaped craft or the multiple orbs emerging from within itself, or even the two that came over to Caz and Dave to scan them whilst the plane circled above. However, we can show that the EMF readings demonstrate clearly the path that the large craft took across the two fields, which was explained by Caz and Dave prior to myself, Emlyn and Mike doing any scans of the fields whatsoever. Electromagnetic radiation has long been a signature of the UFO investigations, as proof to show the presence of unidentified aerial phenomenon. And if that wasn't conclusive enough, the same signals were recorded at Smilog Woods, which led right into the impact area from Lantriston Common and Royal Glamorgan Hospital. Coincidence? I think not. You've seen how the green orb that acted like a scout went into the direction of Lantriston once that large craft had vanished from human sight, which brings us to the explosions over the common. This was unanimously reported by every witness we've ever spoken to. Seismological data confirms this, that indeed at 4:21 a large explosion took place. Right at the time, witnesses felt this, and if you were a patient in the Royal Glam, you felt it also. If that was not proof enough, FOI sent to the MOD specifically asking them why they were conducting operations in Lantriston shows that they are unwilling to come clean about these events, either by signing a standard operation or claiming Section 26. Continuous questions are raised as to why. Seriously, why? Why they chose Pentyrch and then moved this so-called exercise over to Lantriston. Not before training up in North England, by the way. Only then after they closed down the Smilog Woods, whilst men on the ground searched and cleared the area. They cleared the area of whatever it was they fired upon during this time. Now the MOD have stated that this is done with the landowner's permission, yet normal military exercises are, and I repeat, are done with the local residents being notified. You do get a notification. Yet as the evidence shown, both the MOD and the RAF did not list either of these exercises and even went to the trouble of deleting them, as you saw with the Paul Gillian slides. What you also have to consider, is that the snap trees, weird snow and burn marks in Smilog, as well as the ball patch and damaged trees in the fields of Pentyrch, this is evidence of EMF effects when they do not occur naturally. Also, who were the men in the fields? Despite being confronted and the Council of Cardiff being asked about their presence, no such records exist. And why? Ask yourself this, why? Why would a team working for Vodafone carry machine guns and need high-tech scanning equipment to look for mock mines whilst wearing white forensic suits and having a commanding officer? Don't make sense. Nothing makes sense about the official reasons or explanations for that night. Why hasn't the media done any follow-up story about that night, and why did someone find it necessary to hack the devices of both Caz and Dave, deleting vital evidence to shed light on this event? Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on, and believe me, I could. But it's obvious to those who look at the evidence that this was not, and I repeat, not a military exercise. Respected investigators like Kerry Cassidy and Linda Moulton Howe are convinced, as am I, that this is a real UFO event. So I put it to this audience: act like the jury, look at the evidence, be critical but not overly critical, examine it with a clear mind, and you yourself will see that what Caz Clarke has shown you, and what I have presented to you along with Sufon, that this is an evidence, that this is a timeline that is corroborated by what Caz Clarke has told you. I say to you that I believe that the Pentyrch UFO incident is real. What we told you happened is true, and that was not a military exercise, but a real-life military operation to ambush an unexpected interdimensional craft that appeared on the 26th of February in the fields of Pentyrch. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.